Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be asking the question, to crop or not to crop? So there's a lot of different genres of photography, so to say that you shouldn't crop is probably not good to say, to just blanket across all different types of photography, because if you're a nature photographer and you're shooting birds, I've done this, I've photographed birds before and they're super tiny in the frame and you have to like just crop in massively just to see the bird. So to say that you shouldn't crop for all genres of photography is probably not a correct thing to say. Now, since I'm into street photography and fine art photography, and I've dabbled in a bunch of other stuff, I can give you my honest opinion and tell you what I would do and things that you should do to create the best image possible. So let's get into it. Alright, so here we are in the computer and this is an image of mine, and I just wanted to show you this because what I recommend is to compose in camera, especially if you're a fine art photographer. Compose in camera, don't crop your image. I refer to some things as snipping your image, which means just taking off the sides or the top and bottom to fit your dynamic symmetry grid, but to crop into your image you're wasting valuable pixels and you're not in full control of your composition. You're waiting till post to properly compose your image, which is the wrong way to approach it. So this image is a raw image and I was using a 1.5 grid on my camera, and this is the raw image to show you that there's no cropping done. See, there's no crop applied to this, and the final edited image is right here where you can see all I did was apply post-processing to it and created the image that way. So I'm against cropping, especially for street photography. A lot of the Magnum photographers are really against cropping, especially Henry Cartier-Bresson.
This? Nice composition. Well, maybe.
No. I won't give you scissors. Go and shoot yourself.
Which is funny because one of his most popular negatives is heavily cropped. So the story goes that he was looking through this fence and pointing his camera through there, and he could hardly see what was going on, but he pointed his camera through there, waited for the decisive moment, and caught this guy jumping past the puddle or into the puddle. In the darkroom, they decided to lop this side off and create the image that we all know, but they still composed it with the 1.5 rectangle in mind to take advantage of the original ratio and also the diagonals within the legs and things. So street photography, I would say don't ever crop your photos. If it's a photo that is improved with a crop, it's probably not a good photo. You got to start with a good photo, and then if you're trying to improve it, maybe crop it later for your book or a publication. My recommendation is don't crop your street photos. For fine art, it just depends. So what I teach on my blog is to snip the ends off. So this image I composed to the phi rectangle. I had the grid on my camera LCD and composed the foreground and background to represent the specific diagonals of the grid and incorporate arabesques and ellipses and things like that. So let me put this on there. I'm going to turn it and then stretch it out. So that's what I saw through the LCD. We can see the background. It's got this diagonal locking in. Her head's in the polar point, her body's on the left vertical, and then various other things. This angle of the branch there is locking in. So what I mean by snipping is not to like go on your set and compose your shot however you want and then come into Photoshop and crop the heck out of it. I recommend composing your shot with a grid on your LCD, or if you don't have the grid, with these specific diagonals in mind, and then come into Photoshop and just snip off the ends. So if I look into the background of this image, this is what I mean by snipping off. I snipped off just the edge so I could have the phi rectangle proportion. This is the original shot. I composed it with the phi rectangle, and then I came into Photoshop and just snipped off the edge to adhere to the geometry of the phi rectangle. So that's what I mean by snipping. I'm not talking about cropping in like this to a phi rectangle and doing what you want and wasting all these pixels here. Compose in camera, save your pixels, be in control of your composition, and if you must, snip off just a little bit more if you have to fulfill the geometry. But this is snipping. That's what I mean by snipping. Cropping is taking off a bunch. So say we have this image and we want to put it in a magazine cover. Well, we're going to have to crop it after all. So let's drag this up into our magazine cover and see what it looks like. We can see that we could fill this front cover with whatever we want, but we've started with a nice image and now we're cropping down to whatever we like, and it's still going to be a nice image. So we're not cropping to make it a nice image. It's already a nice image, and then we have to crop it to fit the size of this magazine cover. So that's something to consider. So you never want high contrast near the edge, and that's something we all struggle with as street photographers. And if you didn't see my video on the crooked horizon line and Gary Winogrand, take a look at that, because this one definitely has a crooked horizon line, but it's showing the spontaneity of the image. This one actually shot from the hip, which is rare because it usually never turns out. So I've got this woman and she's applying her makeup. So these people up here are creating a little bit more contrast than we want. This little leg here, it's tempting to just go in and just crop it off, but where do you stop? I mean, do we straighten the horizon line? No. I mean, where do you stop when it comes to cropping? The best resolution to that is just don't crop. Okay, as street photographers, you're allowed a little bit of leniency to the composition and the edges and things like that. These people up here, sure, I'd like these people up here to be gone and have a clean composition, but that's just not street photography. Sometimes it's not possible, and that's okay. If we're in Photoshop and we want to reduce the contrast, we can just go up here, reduce the contrast just a little bit, and then pencil out just this woman, and then keep the contrast just on her. You can also take a brush. Let me just sample this. And then drop this down real subtly. We're removing the contrast of those people in the background. Same with this one. So it's real subtle, but it's not removing them, it's not cloning them out, and it's still natural. It's still representing the spontaneity of the image, what was going on that day, what was going on in the scene, and it's not lying to the viewer that's looking towards street photography as a authentic representation of life. So that's why we don't crop in street photography. You want it to represent things as natural as they come. But there's always cases where you might want to throw this on a book cover or in a book or a magazine. So let's drag this up into our magazine and you can see how it looks there. She's definitely Vogue worthy with this makeup. You just line it up and we're inevitably gonna be cropping. So for the magazine cover, we just can put it on there, crop it down a little bit, resize it, and align it so they can see the main subject, this woman. And we want to probably include these cigarettes on the lower left because that's part of the story. And that would be it. So that would be your magazine cover. And it's cropped, but it's part of the process of creating a magazine or a book cover, things like that. But the original shouldn't be cropped. Also, another thing to mention is if you start to manipulate the photo, if you're a street photographer, you start to manipulate, even if you're a fine art photographer and you start to crop in, so much, it gets kind of ridiculous and you start to lose context and the image starts to change the way it looks. So say we want to cut all the people out, but we want the makeup also. So this is what the image would look like at the end. Photoshop this out like Steve McCurry if we wanted. If you're a fine art photographer like him, you can pretty much manipulate it however you want to, fit the book that you're making or things like that. He got in some big trouble for having some manipulated photos. So this is what it would look like, but to me that changes the whole image and you can tell that it's been cropped heavily. It flattens out and the context is missing. So next time you decide to crop, just leave it as is. Make a commitment to try and compose better in camera and save yourself some headaches of whether to crop or not to crop while you're in Photoshop. Alright, so that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for all your support. I never get tired of saying that. I really truly appreciate all of you and all of the likes and subscribes, and hoping 2018 is going to be a really huge year for us, and I'm going to bring you all the content you want to see. If you're stumped on something and you want to see how I would do it, comment below or private message me and I'll research it and I'm going to present it in a video so you can clearly understand it. So thank you so much. Take care, guys. Bye. Oh my god, that's cool. No way. We got a park. God, look at this. With the sun hitting part of it.